Hello all. This is a review on bone features with some, I want to sort of point out or repoint out the definitions of some of the bone features that you're likely to encounter, as well as give you some tips and hints on how to figure out, what a bone feature might look like based on its name, or what its name might be based on its appearance. So, this is a review of most of the different types of features that you can see in a bone. And as you can see up here, looking at the skull first, a foramen, everyone should know what a foramen is. A foramen is a hole that goes through a bone. It's usually a hole that is broader than it is deep, or at least is not terribly cavernous. Lines are slightly raised, elongated ridges that often something like a large tendon or large ligament might attach to, or something like that. A meatus or a canal is similar to a foramen, but is usually like longer than it is broad, so it's just sort of a little bit more cavernous. A process is any sort of sticky out part on a bone. Generally speaking, like a process could be a large, broad, flat, sticky out part like this, or it could be a sharp, sticky out point like this spine right here. Sharp processes are often called spines, or spinous processes, or stylus processes. A stylus is a sharp tool for writing on wax tablets. Condyles. So condyles are usually rounded, articular knobs. They're not flat articular surfaces. They're not articular grooves. They're sort of rounded articular features, but it means that they're going to form part of a joint. Here you can see this is another process here that you guys are all pretty familiar with. It's again a sticky outy portion. Fossa are usually shallow, broad areas. A fossa literally means like a valley or a basin. They're usually going to be concave areas that might have something that sticks into them or might not. So here on this scapula here, you can see these fossa. They don't necessarily have anything that's going to stick in them. Actually, they have muscles that stick in them, but not bones or anything like that. But we will see several types of fossa that have bony projections that like basically fit with them. And often a fossa will be named for the thing that fits into it, which will not be something which will not be named for the bone that it's on, but rather the bone that it fits with. Tuberosities. So tuberosities are rough, elevated, sort of slightly rounded surfaces. Often things will attach to them. These are usually not articular points. They're usually points of attachment, but they're basically slight rounded bumps. Here we can see the head of the humerus here, or the head of the femur. Those are basically specialized condyles that fit into ball and socket joints, and those are usually called heads specifically. And down here we can see some specialized condyles here. These are the condyles of the femur, and here we can see the oh god, I forgot what it was called. The capitulum and trochlea of the humerus right here. And these are special condyles. Remember, condyles are articular surfaces. And epicondyles are usually sort of bony projections, processes that are located nearby condyles. And often these serve as points of attachment for ligaments or tendons or some sort of connective tissue. On the humerus and the femur, the sort of epicondyle-like things that are close to the head have special names, which we'll get into in just a second. You should look at this table and know this table. You should know all of these different terms and what sort of a feature that they describe. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a few of them here that weren't on the previous page. A protuberance is basically a special type of process. It's an outgrowth or a protruding part, often found, sometimes found in between articulatory surfaces, although not always. A sulcus is a groove that something fits into. A facet is a smooth, flat articular surface as opposed to a rounded articular surface or a concave articular surface. Concave articular surfaces can sometimes be notches. A notch is a concave surface that something fits into. Sometimes notches are articular, meaning that they form parts of joints. But sometimes notches are just going to be an area where something can fit into, but there's no articulation going on there. We'll see examples of both of those. So there's a few different types of these features on the mandible here. So you can see these up here. These are the mandibular condyles, and that means that they're rounded, knob-like articulatory surfaces. Here we can see the coronoid process. All right? So it's not called a condyle, so it doesn't form part of a joint. It's an attachment point. Here we can see the mandibular notch, and this particular notch is not an area where it does not itself form part of a joint, but it exists because there are things that need to pass through that area, and there are connective tissue and tendons and muscles and whatnot that need to pass through there. And here we can see the mandibular foramen, which is a little hole through which a nerve passes in this case. So on a vertebrae, there are several processes and foramens that you should all know. The vertebral foramen is the big hole in the center. Transverse means to the sides. So these are transverse processes. These are processes that stick out to the sides. On cervical vertebrae, there are transverse foramen, which are smaller foramen off to the sides. And here we see the spinous process, which sticks out the back. We have articulatory facets, superior and inferior, and of course the vertebral body. So here we have a clavicle, and particularly what I wanted to point out here is the conoid tubercle. All right, so remember that a tubercle is a rounded, a small rounded process. It's basically like a lump or a hill. And so you can see here that it's not a sharp spiky thing pointing out. It's basically this little lumpy hill on the side of the clavicle, and so it is a tubercle. If you only know of one tubercle on the clavicle, and what's labeled is clearly a tubercle on the clavicle, then you should probably pick that tubercle. Either way, if you see something labeled like this, that's clearly not a condyle or an articulatory surface or a notch or a fossa, right? Pick some sort of tubercle from your list. Here on the humerus, right? So the greater tubercle here and here, and a lesser tubercle there, basically fulfill the same role as epicondyles. They are attachment points that are located near the articulatory surface of the head. In between these two tubercles is what's called the intertubercular sulcus. A sulcus is a groove, and intertubercular basically means between the tubercles. So if you have a sulcus that goes in between two features, it might be the whatever those features are. Sulcus or protuberance, depending upon what it is that we're talking about. This sort of shallow hill-like thing here, that's the deltoid tuberosity. Right? And remember that a tuberosity is a rough, elevated surface. It is kind of like a tubercle, except a little bit smaller than a tubercle. It's like a tubercle minor. Down here at the bottom, we got lots of stuff going on, right? So we have two articulatory surfaces, the trochlea and the capitulum, and we have three fossa, right? So here we have the coronoid fossa, here we have the radial fossa, and here we have the olecranon fossa. And all three of these are fossas that things fit into, and all of them are named for the thing that fits into them. So the olecranon fossa, that's where the olecranon process notches into. The coronoid fossa, that's where the coronoid process fits into. The radial fossa, that's where the radius fits into. So if it's a fossa named for a bone feature, the bone feature that fits into it is probably what it's named for. Here we can see the tibia and fibula, and there's a few things that I want to point out here, right? So we have two condyles at the top of the tibia, the lateral and the medial, and you've got this sort of sticky out process in between them. That process in between them is called the intercondylar eminence. An eminence is well, basically means elevated area, so it's a process that sticks out, and intercondylar means between the condyles. So it basically just describes where it is and what it is. The lateral and medial malleolus, these are the mallets that form your ankles, and remember that the lateral one is going to be on the fibula, la for lateral. And yep, so here I have something for you to label. So you'll see this is the ulna and the radius. And we have some things that are labeled, but we also have some unlabeled lines here. And so I want you to pause the video right now and see if you can figure out what type of feature each of these is and what its name is. So go ahead and pause now. All right. So this line didn't go in here, but this is the olecranon right there. And this right here is the coronoid process. So remember that the ulna makes this sort of claw-looking thing, and the olecranon is the top part of the claw, the fingers of the claw, and the coronoid process is sort of the thumbs of the claw. And between here, this line right here, this is, well, it's a type of notch. So what do you think fits into there? Well, remember that that area articulates with the trochlea. So this is the trochlear notch. Right there. If you look at this right here, what is that? Well, it's clearly a process. It is not a spinous or spiky process. It looks like it's non-articular. It's fairly rounded, so it's probably a tuberosity. And in fact, this is a tuberosity. Now, tuberosities are usually going to be named for, right, so remember, notches are named for the thing that fits into them. Tuberosities are usually named for the thing that they are on, and this is on the radius. So this is the radial tuberosity. Right up here, we can see this thing here, which is the same as this thing right there, right? Well, that's another tuberosity, and it's attached to the ulna, so it's called the ulnar tuberosity. Now this right here is a notch on the ulna, and you can see that the radius fits inside of that notch, so it is the radial notch of the ulna. It's the radial notch because the radius fits into it. Down here, we can see this bone. This is the radius, and this is the notch that the ulna fits into. So that is the ulnar notch of the radius. Down here, we see that there and that there. Those are both processes, and they're sort of sharp, spiky processes. So those are both styloid processes. And they're both styloid processes. Both the radius and the ulna have a styloid process. Here we see the femur, and again, I'd like you to pause this and fill in those lines if you can. Okay, so let's start up here. This and this are both processes. They sort of fulfill an epicondylar type function. They're nearby the head of the femur here, but they are a special type and they have a special name. They are the greater and lesser trochanter. I'm going to label the greater trochanter and not the lesser, just to save time here. Of note down here on the bottom, this articular surface here, it does not articulate with the tibia. What it articulates with is the patella. What articulates with the tibia is the medial and lateral condyles of the femur. This here, this is a groove in between those condyles. So what do you think it might be called? Well, it's between two condyles, so it's probably the intercondylar something. And in this case, it's the intercondylar fossa. Here we see two epicondyles, and it's the lateral and medial epicondyle, and you can see from the direction that the head of the femur is taking that this is going to be the lateral epicondyle and this is going to be the medial epicondyle. And yeah, so that is most of the features that I wanted to talk about right here. So from this you can see that if you have a list of the possible terms, which you should have a list memorized, but I will also give you a list and have given you a list. If you know what the feature that you're looking at is, whether it is a sulcus or an epicondyle or a tuberosity or a fossa, you can eliminate most of the possibilities out of hand. And then if you know where that bone is found in the body and you know what thing is going to articulate with it or be found next to it, you can often just sort of logic your way through to what the proper name of it should be. So I hope you guys found this useful, and I will see you in class.